So what languages did you speak at home?
Oh, pretty much just English. My parents, they knew some Japanese, although they said, oh, we don't really know how to speak very well. But my grandmother on my father's side lived with us for a while. I was really young. After we moved back from Seattle, where I was born, we moved back to this area, and we lived in Sunnyvale. And our grandmother lived with us for a while because one of my uncles very suddenly passed away, and he was kind of looking after my grandma, and his family. My father was really worried about them, as well as her mom. So he worked for Boeing up in Seattle and then moved back here to work for Lockheed because he had gotten a job as an aerospace engineer in Boeing. So he transferred to Lockheed. And so my Grandma Izu didn't speak much English at all. So they definitely could speak Japanese. But to us at home, it was mostly just English. And that's kind of the way we're brought up. Although we did know some phrases. Unfortunately, they'd never taught us any of the words I wanted to learn later, like different swear words. I had to learn that after I went to college. I had to ask friends, like, how do you say, what does that word mean? And they look at me really incredulous. That's baby talk for poop. Don't you know that? I go, no, I don't. We never talk like that about that. So.
Did, I guess, not learning the language, did that impact you in any way in kind of your relationship to the Japanese culture? Did you have any reflections on that? Or because a lot of Japanese also speak English for many decades.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this story, and this took years later to understand this. So on my mom's side, my grandmother, grandfather, they were still alive when I was a little kid. And after the war, they had moved to a house in Japantown. So we would always go visit them pretty regularly, and we would come over for big events and everything. So my grandfather would just sit in this easy chair, what do you call it, those reclining chairs, and he didn't talk much. He was very quiet. He had this very funny kind of crooked smile on his face. And I was just a little kid, so I just thought, well, that's just the way old people are. They just don't talk much, especially to little kids. The only time he would talk is if my aunties exchanged some kind of exchange about something, needing something or some comment he would make, and they would respond in Japanese. So first of all, I learned that, my parents probably know more Japanese than they're letting on, because that's all they talked. But I just thought that he didn't know English, and that's just the way grandparents were. My oldest brother, though, who had been sentient longer than I had been kind of observing things. And years later, he told me, don't you know that he spoke English really well, our grandfather? And he just didn't want to talk to us. And so my oldest brother had a theory of why he didn't talk to us. And it was not that he didn't like little kids. It's just that, well, my brother said that I think he had emotional problems, especially after the war. He was a farmer, and after camp, he was into his 50s at least, and he could no longer be the provider for the family. My uncles, my mom's older brothers, kind of took over and earned a lot of money and helped them figure out how to survive. And so he did some gardening. A lot of Japanese Americans did that after the war. And the way my brother thinks, he was kind of a broken man. So I just didn't understand. I just thought, that's just what way old people are. And so it's connected to the language thing, because I just started realizing how oblivious I was. And perhaps not learning Japanese was a way to keep me from learning this kind of history, because maybe it was something that was just difficult to figure out how to talk about. Because years later, I wondered, how come my aunties and uncles didn't tell us about my grandfather? I mean, if my grandfather really knew how to speak English, why didn't they think it was weird that he wasn't talking to us? It seems like they would have said something, but they never did. It was just, that's just the way he is, so don't worry about it. Then I started realizing this is true on my father's side too. There are these stories, I heard these rumors about nobody would tell us, and because I couldn't speak Japanese, I probably wouldn't be able to find out anyway, so maybe I don't know that as a fact, because my parents insisted, we don't really know how to speak Japanese very well. I believe that they probably didn't know how to talk about complicated things involving emotions and stuff like that. So I did understand that, but I guess that's just kind of a background to how I think not knowing the language affected me.